I came home to silence. Not the good kind, the kind that chills your bones. The gravel crunched under my old truck's tires as I turned down the last bend of the road, expecting to see smoke rising from the chimney of the cabin I built with my own hands. For 10 years that view was my anchor, the one place I could breathe. But when the trees parted and the lake came into sight, I slammed the brakes so hard the truck skidded sideways. My chest locked, my hands went cold, because the cabin wasn't there anymore where my life had stood just hours earlier. There was nothing but splintered wood, torn earth, and the stench of diesel fuel. The air reeked of raw dirt, fresh mud gouged open by a bulldozer's tracks. I stumbled out, boots sinking into the churned mess, staring at a brown scar where my home should have been. My wife's quilt, Sarah's quilt, was tangled in a wet heap of insulation. A chunk of my dock lay crushed against the shoreline. My workshop, my tools, my grandfather's lathe, reduced to shards. My throat burned, but no sound came out. The silence pressed against my ears until it felt like the whole world had stopped breathing. Then a car door slammed behind me. I turned. Lana Dorsey, the HOA president, was walking across the wreckage in her blazer and heels like she owned the place. She didn't even look at the ruins. She had a folder in her hand and a smug smile that made my fists curl. She held out an envelope like she was delivering mail. "Here's your invoice, Tom. $17,900 for demolition and cleanup. Due in 30 days. The world tilted. I couldn't even form words. She placed the envelope on the hood of my truck and turned away, dust rising in her wake as if she hadn't just destroyed a man's entire life. That was the moment the silence inside me shifted. It wasn't grief anymore. It was cold anger. I called the sheriff's office, phone shaking in my hand. 40 minutes later, a deputy and the sheriff himself arrived. They walked the perimeter, kicked at the rubble, and acted bored. When Lana returned with her neat folder, the sheriff flipped through her papers, nodded, and handed them back. "Looks like a civil matter. Mr. Riek, you'll need to take it to court." Then he climbed into his car and drove away, leaving me standing in the ruins of my cabin with the woman who ordered it gone. That night, I slept in my truck wrapped in a blanket. I stared at the invoice, at the forged violations inside, non-compliant slope grading and an unsightly brush, lies dressed up in official language. I'd spent 40 years as a county lineman. I knew slope grading like I knew the back of my own hands. My land had been the same for centuries. But none of that mattered, because she had paperwork and I had nothing, or so she thought. 2 days later, I sat at my insurance agent's office with pictures of the wreckage spread across his desk. He was sympathetic at first, promised to file the claim. Then he called me back, voice cold and formal. "I'm sorry, Tom, but this demolition is documented as authorized by your Homeowners Association. Under your policy, it qualifies as voluntary. We can't pay." Voluntary. They bulldozed my home, and the insurance company called it voluntary. I sat in my truck at a roadside rest stop for hours, watching the sun bleed out of the sky. My cabin was gone. My wife's last quilt crushed. My insurance denied. And now I had a bill for almost $18,000. I was 68 years old, and everything I had left was stolen. But grief wasn't going to save me, and shouting wasn't going to win. If Lana wanted to play with paper, I was going to bury her in it. The next morning, I drove 3 hours west through the Virginia hills until I reached a tidy brick house with green shutters. When the door opened, an old friend looked me over once and simply said, "Get in here, Tom, pot of coffee's on." His name was Judge Malcolm Haysmack to me, retired now, but sharp as ever. He'd spent decades tearing bullies apart from behind the bench, and when I laid the forged violation notices, the demolition invoice, and the insurance denial on his kitchen table, he didn't pity me. He didn't even speak at first. He just steepled his fingers and listened until the clock ticked out the silence. Then he leaned back, eyes hard as granite. "They think you're alone," he said. "That's their mistake." My chest tightened, not with fear this time, but with something else, resolve. Because Lana Dorsey had no idea the storm she had just unleashed. Mac didn't waste time. He pulled out a yellow legal pad, scribbling names and questions like he was back in chambers. "Proof, Tom, proof is a hammer. You don't need rago, need a hammer so big no one can ignore it." I sat across from him, my hands still trembling. Where do I even start? Mac looked up, his sharp eyes cutting right through me. "Start with family. Start with people who see the world the way it is, not the way bullies pretend it to be." My first call was to my niece, Emily. She was 34, a licensed civil engineer, sharp as a tack and fearless with a calculator. When I told her what happened, her voice cracked with anger, but she kept it professional. "Uncle Tom, send me every piece of paper they gave you, every photo, especially that slope grading violation." The second person I thought of wasn't family, but might as well have been. My neighbor across the ridge, Joseph Morales, though everyone called him Tracker Joe, a retired Marine who trusted no one. He had security cameras mounted like sentries, and I knew for a fact he flew drones over his property just to keep watch. When I walked up his porch steps, he didn't even wait for me to speak. He just nodded once. I saw the bulldozer, Tom, already pulling the footage. My last recruit was quieter, an older man across the lake, soft-spoken, who used to work as a county clerk. Years ago, over a beer he told me he kept meticulous records, meeting minutes, incorporation documents, old ordinances, the kind of dusty paper trail most people forgot about. I needed that now more than ever. Within 3 days, Mac's basement looked like a war room. Maps of the lake pinned to the wall. A timeline stretched across the chalkboard. Boxes of documents on the floor. Emily's voice came crackling through on speakerphone, and what she said froze me in place. "Uncle Tom, this violation notice is garbage." She walked me through it step by step. A legitimate slope assessment required soil borings, cross-sections, and a licensed geotechnical report. None of that was in the HOA's paperwork. Instead, they'd tossed around scare words like watershed instability and unsightly brush. Emily laughed bitterly. "It's a forest, Uncle Tom. Brush is what forests have. This isn't a violation, it's a joke." Then she dropped the real bombshell. The inspector's license number scrawled at the bottom of the notice. It belonged to a man who had been stripped of his license 6 years ago for falsifying documents. In other words, the so-called inspection report wasn't just sloppy. It was a forgery. I gripped the phone so hard my knuckles turned white. Proof a hammer. And this was only the beginning. 2 nights later, Tracker Joe slid a hard drive across Mac's kitchen table. "You're gonna want to see this." On the screen, grainy at first, I saw the road that led down toward my property. 3 figures stood there: Lana, her son-in-law Doug Neely, and another board member. They couldn't see my cabin from where they stood, but Tracker's drone could see them perfectly. Even better, its microphone picked up every word. Lana's voice rang out, sharp and arrogant. "Don't worry, we'll get that hillbilly out. He doesn't even know what's coming," Doug chuckled. "I'll make sure the violation report looks extra official." The third man laughed, low and cruel. I sat there in Mac's kitchen, staring at the paused frame of Lana's smirking face, my pulse pounding. This wasn't paranoia. This wasn't a mistake. This was a conspiracy, caught in high definition. But the real knife came from an unexpected place. A knock on my truck window late one evening as I sat parked by the lake. It was Barbara Teen, the HOA treasurer. I'd always seen her trailing behind Lana like a shadow, clipboard clutched to her chest. But tonight her hands shook as she held out a small USB drive. "Take it," she whispered, her eyes darting nervously. "I can't live with this anymore." Inside Mac's basement, we plugged it in. Files appeared. Spreadsheets, hidden budgets, transfers to shell companies. But the worst was the audio. Barbara had been secretly recording board meetings for 2 years, stashing the files away out of fear. And now, her voice recorder spilled the truth. Lana's laughter filled the room. "We don't find them to fix things. We find them to sell. Rack up enough violations, put a lien on their home, and eventually they break. They sell cheap. Then my realtor contacts take care of the rest." For a long moment, no one spoke. The only sound was the faint hum of Mac's refrigerator. My chest felt like stone. They hadn't just destroyed my cabin. They had been running a shakedown racket for years. My tragedy wasn't an accident. It was a business plan. Mac leaned back in his chair. His eyes narrowed. "They think this is about landscaping. But what they've done, this is organized fraud." He tapped the binder of documents he'd been assembling. "An organized fraud has a very particular name under the law." I looked at him, my voice low and steady. "Rico," he nodded once. It was week 3, a quiet Sunday morning when Max slid the thick binder across the table, toward me. "We're not filing a lawsuit, Tom. Lawsuits take years. They drain money. They drag. What we're filing is a criminal referral, straight to the state attorney general's office." I ran my hand over the binder's cover, feeling the weight of it. The forged inspections, the drone footage, the audio files, the spreadsheets, every lie, documented, every crime, time-stamped. For the first time since I stood in the mud of my demolished home, I felt the ground steady under my boots. This wasn't about a cabin anymore. This was about justice. Cold, hard justice. And justice was about to knock on Lana Dorsey's door. The letter from the Attorney General's office looked plain enough, a white envelope with a seal embossed in blue. Max slid it open with a steak knife and read it twice before looking up at me. "Emergency administrative hearing," he said, voice measured. 2 weeks. They're considering receivership over the association while they investigate. He let the paper fall to the table like a card in a quiet game. "This is the door, Tom. We walk through it, calm. We walk through it ready." I didn't buy a suit. I didn't polish my boots. I ironed a clean flannel and tucked the binder under my arm like it was a part of me. The courthouse smelled like old wood and lemon oil, the kind of place where decisions settle into the dust and stay for 100 years. When I stepped into the hallway outside the hearing room, Lana was already there. She stood with 2 board members and a man in a slick charcoal suit I recognized as her lawyer. Her smile looked carved. She glanced at my shirt, then at her lawyer's cufflinks, and I could see the calculation in her eyes. She thought this was a game she knew how to play. "You really think anyone cares about your little shack?" she murmured as she glided past, voice sweetened with poison. "We have the best counsel in the county. You have dirt under your fingernails." I didn't answer. The bailiff called us in. The hearing room wasn't grand. It was compact, almost intimate. The administrative judge sat center, glasses low on her nose, the state's counsel to one side, and the association to the other. The judge's eyes were the kind that miss nothing and forgive less. A court reporter adjusted her headphones. The clock on the wall ticked with that exaggerated courtroom rhythm, each second a small hammer. The HOA's lawyer went first. He stood with practiced ease, voice smooth as creek water. Your Honor, this is a simple matter of a delinquent resident resisting necessary compliance. The association acted in good faith to protect environmental stability and property values. The demolition, while regrettable, followed due process after repeated notices. He made it sound tidy, rational, heroic even. He gestured to a stack of glossy photographs labeled with bold captions. I stared at the images, angles I'd never seen, dates I didn't recognize, and felt that old weight return to my chest. Then I looked down at my hands gripping the podium and reminded myself why I was here. Not for rage, for receipts, Mr. Riek, the judge said. You may respond. I stood, the binder heavy, palms steady. Your Honor, I started, and my own voice surprised Milo, even the way I used to speak on the radio when a storm took down half the county. This isn't about landscaping. It's about forged documents and an association operating outside the law. I opened the binder and let the pages breathe. The room seemed to lean in. First, I said, sliding the association's meeting minutes toward the bailiff, who brought them to the bench. The vote authorizing demolition was taken without a legal quorum. These are their own minutes. The signatures on proxy forms belong to residents who moved away or passed away. That vote is void. The HOA lawyer shifted, ready to object. The judge lifted a finger without looking up. Sit, second, I continued, and I felt Mac's presence behind me like a steadying hand. The slope grading violation is impossible on its face. No soil borings, no geotechnical analysis, no county filing. It's scare language masquerading as law. I nodded to the gallery. Emily stood and walked to the witness table, her hair pulled back, eyes clear. The judge swore her in with a rustle of paper and the quiet authority of someone who has done this 1,000 times. Ms. Alvarez, I said, would you tell the court your qualifications? Licensed professional engineer, she said. Civil, with a focus on slope, stability, and watershed management. 12 years experience. I reviewed the violation notice and the site survey. In your professional opinion, did the association follow an appropriate process before declaring a hazard? She looked at the papers, then at the judge. No, a legitimate slope hazard determination requires borings, cross-sectional analysis, and peer-reviewed assessment. None were done. The phrases used, watershed instability, unsightly brush, are not standards. They're vague. The county code contains no such violation. How would you describe the document presented as an inspection report? Emily didn't hesitate. Improper. The license number listed belongs to a different inspector, whose license was revoked 6 years prior for document falsification. She turned a page and tapped. Additionally, the metadata across multiple reports matches a single template. Identical phrasing, identical formatting, even the same typographical error repeated in 6 separate files over 4 years. The judge lifted her gaze. You're saying these were templated? Yes, Your Honor. The digital fingerprint indicates a master document was reused to produce multiple so-called inspections. The HOA's lawyer was on his feet. Your Honor, we have no evidence that any alleged metadata. The judge cut him off without raising her voice. Counselor, sit down and wait your turn. I felt the room tilt, just a little, like a boat catching a wave. Third, I said, passing a USB and a numbered evidence envelope to the bailiff. This is video and audio recorded by a neighbor's legally operated drone. It was taken on a public right-of-way 2 weeks before my home was demolished. The screen flickered to life on a small cart-mounted monitor. The footage showed the gravel shoulder by the trees, Lana's blazer catching the light. Her voice came through the speakers, clean as a bell. Don't worry, we'll get that hillbilly out. He doesn't even know what's coming. Doug's chuckle followed, low and oily. I'll make sure the violation report looks extra official. Silence followed, the kind that steals air from a room. The court reporter's fingers hovered for an extra beat, then resumed their steady clack. The judge looked to the state's table. The state's counsel stood. Your Honor, with the court's permission, the Attorney General's office would like to admit preliminary findings. She held up a stack of bank statements with colored tabs like a forest of flags. Our subpoena for the association's accounts and related personal accounts identified over $400,000 in questionable disbursements, payments to shell entities linked to board members, transfers to personal payment platforms, and unapproved bonuses without member authorization. The HOA's lawyer finally found his voice. We object to the characterization overruled, the judge said, already reading. And the state's counsel continued. We received voluntary cooperation from the association's treasurer, Ms. Teen. Every eye in the room found Barbara. She looked smaller than I remembered, but steadier too. Ms. Teen provided a secondary set of records and audio recordings of executive sessions. The recordings include statements indicating a pattern of leveraging fines and liens to induce distressed sales too. Preferred buyers. The first audio clip played, Lana's voice again, bored and breezy. We don't find them to fix, we find them to sell. Stack enough, they fold. Someone in the gallery whispered, "My God," and the bailiff shot him a look. The judge kept reading, eyes flitting between columns of numbers, then up to the faces before her. I could see it, she wasn't looking at me anymore. She was looking through the veneer to what sat underneath. The HOA's lawyer leaned toward Lana, lips tight, whispering furiously. The small microphone at the defense table was still live. Lana bent closer, voice a hiss. "I told you not to use my PayPal." The court reporter's hands didn't stop. The judge's head turned slowly, like a thunderhead finding a horizon. The state's counsel didn't move at all. It was the stillness of a hunter when the deer finally steps into the clearing. The judge settled her glasses on the bridge of her nose and spoke. Into the space they'd made for her. Pending full adjudication, this court finds sufficient grounds to appoint a receiver over the Lake Vista Road Association, effective immediately. The association's accounts are frozen. The receiver will take custody of all records, physical and digital. The HOA lawyer sputtered. "Your Honor," she kept going. "Furthermore, based on evidence of coordinated document falsification, unlawful enrichment, and fraudulent inducement of property sales, the court refers this matter to the Criminal Division for investigation under the state's racketeering statute." The word hung there. Racketeering, it sounded too big for a room that small. Like thunder shaking a church, the gavel's crack wasn't loud, but it was absolute. The hearing adjourned. The bailiff announced it in the ritual way, "All right," and for a moment the room felt like it didn't know whether to breathe or run. The gallery erupted in whispers. The hallway outside churned alive with cameras I hadn't noticed going in. The red lights winking awake like eyes in the dark. I didn't go to them. I found a quiet corner by a window and watched dust twirl in a shaft of light. Mac joined me, hands in his pockets, gaze still. He didn't smile. He didn't need to. "Receivership is the first domino," he said softly. "Criminal referral is a second. You did what you had to do." "This isn't over," I said. "No," he agreed. "But now you're not the only one pushing." Over the next week, the receiver's office felt like a hive. Residents who had been too afraid to speak started leaving messages, then standing in line, then sitting across from clipped-voiced investigators with yellow pads and patient eyes. One by one, the stories started to match. Repeated fines for nonsense. Threat letters that looked official until you read them twice. Proxy votes signed by hands that never held those pens. I watched from the bench in the hallway as an older widow stepped out of a room with her knuckles white around a tissue. She'd painted her fence the wrong shade of beige in 2018, she told me, and they fined her until she sold. The buyer was a company with a cheerful name. The receiver had already mapped the shell. It circled back to Lana's ex. It circled back like everything circled back. The next hearing came faster than I expected. The state attorney general himself walked into the courtroom, not as a spectator this time, but as a man carrying a purpose. He didn't pose. He set down a stack of motions that thumped like a heartbeat. "Your Honor," he began. "The state seeks leave to file criminal charges against Ms. Dorsey and 2 members of the executive board." He read them out one after another, each charge the click of a ratchet tightening: conspiracy to commit fraud, multiple counts of document forgery, wire fraud associated with the movement of association funds through personal payment platforms, and racketeering under state statute for operating an enterprise through a pattern of fraud. A murmur rippled the gallery and died under the bailiff's stare. The judge's face didn't change. She turned to the association's table. Lana stared straight ahead, eyes flat, as if this were happening to someone on a screen. And, the AG said, the state moves for immediate and permanent dissolution of the association, with remaining assets and recovered proceeds to be placed in a victim restitution fund. The HOA's lawyer stood so fast his chair scraped. "Your Honor, dissolution is extreme and premature." The judge held up a hand. Motion granted. The sound wasn't the gavel. It was the intake of breath from a room full of people who had been waiting to exhale for years. The judge turned to me. Her voice softened half a shade. "Mr. Riek, regarding your property loss. The court notes the insurer's denial relied on fraudulent representations by the association. The denial is void. The insurer is ordered to pay the full policy, plus penalties and interest." I blinked. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like oxygen. She wasn't finished. "In addition, punitive damages are awarded to Mr. Riek, to be satisfied through liquidation of association assets, personal assets of board members implicated in fraud, and disbursements from the restitution fund. The amount is $30 million. The number hovered in the air. Unreal and heavy. Not like money, but like a verdict on weight, on time, on grief. I didn't look at Lana. I didn't look at anyone. I looked at my hands and tried to remember how to unclench them. "Bailiff," the judge said, her tone returning to granite, "execute the warrants." The officers moved with the unhurried certainty of weather. They didn't shout. They didn't hurry. They simply placed their hands on shoulders and asked people to stand. The sound of handcuffs closing is not loud. It is small and metallic and final. Lana didn't cry. She didn't speak. She stared somewhere far away as they turned her and led her past the rail. It started with one pair of hands clapping, then two, then enough that it became a hush of approval. Not loud, not wild, but real. The judge didn't stop it. She let it crest and fall. The court reporter took it down the way she had taken down every word that mattered. When the doors opened, the hallway flashed. Microphones rose. Questions flew. "Mr. Reek, sir, over here." I saw Emily at the edge of the crowd, her eyes damp and bright, and I saw Mac at the back of the gallery, giving me a small nod that said more than words could. I eased out a side door instead, down the quiet stairwell that smelled like old heating pipes and stone, and found the morning untouched by cameras on the far side of the building. The sky was the pale blue that comes after a storm empties itself. I sat on the steps and let the quiet settle. My phone buzzed with messages I didn't read. The courthouse clock chimed the hour and faded. I wasn't thinking about $30 million. I wasn't thinking about headlines. I was thinking about diesel and mud and a quilt in a heap and the way a room changes when someone stops lying. I went home, not to a house, not yet, but to the land. The scar was still raw. The smell of disturbed earth still rose when the sun warmed it. I walked it anyway, hands in my pockets, and I could almost hear Sarah's voice as the breeze lifted off the water. A little to the left, Tom. By the time I reached the shoreline, the first birds were skimming low, stitching the lake back together with invisible thread. I stood on the crushed edge of where the dock had been and watched the water settle, not because anything was finished, because something had finally begun. The settlement money landed in my account a week later, numbers so large they didn't even look real. For 2 days I just stared at the screen, waiting for the bank to call and say it was a mistake. $30 million, but it didn't feel like winning the lottery. It felt like restitution, like the state had measured the weight of what was taken and forced the guilty to carry it instead of me. The first check I wrote wasn't for a car or a vacation. It was for a survey. A geotechnical firm came out with trucks and drills, boring deep into the hillside until they hit bedrock. They produced a report thicker than a phone book, every line stamped and sealed. My land was stable. My land had always been stable. I wanted proof carved into paper so solid no fraudster could ever twist it again. Then I hired an architect. Bigger, I told him, but not fancier. Stronger, safer. Wide doorways, a main floor with no stairs, hurricane ties on every rafter. I wasn't building Sarah's dream anymore. That was gone with her. This was different. This was a home to carry me through however many years I had left. A house no inspector, real or fake, could ever fault. The construction crews arrived that spring, their machines growling over the same earth a bulldozer had scarred. But this time, the sound of diesel didn't sting. It sang. The whine of saws, the rhythm of hammers, the murmur of men setting beams. It was the opposite of erasure. It was resurrection. Neighbors started drifting down the drive. Tracker Joe showed up most afternoons with a thermos of coffee. He'd stand with me by the piles of lumber, pointing out angles where he'd run security wires or position cameras. Sometimes the neighborhood kids pedaled their bikes down to help haul scrap wood or clear brush. I paid them in lemonade and stories. Then one Saturday morning, a convoy of pickups rolled in. A dozen men in ball caps and boots climbed out, veterans from the local post. Word of my story having spread, they didn't ask permission. They just started laying out lumber by the waterline. By sundown, a new dock stretched across the lake, wider and sturdier than the one I'd lost. When I tried to pay them, they waved me off. "Welcome home, brother," one of them said, gripping my hand hard enough to remind me that some debts aren't meant to be paid in dollars. The cabin rose slowly, but with purpose. Each wall framed out, each rafter sunk deep into steel brackets, and with every nail, the nightmare of demolition lost a little more of its grip. But the fight wasn't just about my cabin anymore. It was about everyone who had sat in that courtroom, clutching their own stories of fines, liens, and threats. The widow from 2018, the family forced to sell over a fence color, the people too scared to speak until they saw handcuffs on wrists. So I took part of that settlement money and sat back down with Mac and Emily. We didn't talk about rebuilding walls. We talked about rebuilding trust. Out of those late nights came a simple idea, a non-profit. We called it Property Watch. The mission was clear: give homeowners the tools to fight back. On our website, we uploaded templates for documenting harassment, demand letters for financial transparency, guides to file complaints. Emily drafted plain English checklists to help people spot forged reports. We built a network of honest surveyors, engineers, and lawyers who agreed to take cases pro bono or at reduced rates. We weren't fighting battles for people. We were giving them the hammers to fight their own. And almost immediately, the ripple spread. Emails started arriving from across the state at first, then across the country. Stories poured in. People fined for keeping a service dog. Families threatened with foreclosure over a garden shed. Retirees told to tear down fences because they didn't match HOA preferred colors. Every email carried the same fear I'd felt that morning when I saw the rubble, and every one of them ended the same way. What can I do? We gave them answers. We gave them receipts. But the biggest shockwaves didn't come from the non-profit. They came from the county itself. My case had been a wake-up call. Officials finally realized how easy it was for a small clique to hijack an association. bend rules, and terrorize homeowners under the cover of paperwork. That summer, the county commission passed a new ordinance. Simple, revolutionary. Any enforcement action over $500 or anything that touched a person's property now required two things: a recorded vote of the full membership, not just the board, and a confirmation by a county-appointed independent inspector. No more clipboard kingdoms, no more phantom votes, no more fake inspections. They called it Tom's Law. The first time I heard the phrase, it was from a neighbor shaking my hand at the grocery store. "Because of you, they can't do it to anyone else," she said. Her voice cracked the same way mine had when I first saw the wreckage. A year after the bulldozers tore through, I sat on the porch of my new home, fresh-cut pines still perfuming the air. Mac pulled up in his old sedan and joined me in a rocking chair. We watched the lake shimmer orange under the setting sun, the new dock solid against the shore. He was quiet for a long time. Then he nodded toward the beams of the house, the sturdy railings, the foundation buried deep in bedrock. "This one's going to outlive both of us, Tom, this house. That law, what you built here," I knew what he meant. It wasn't about walls or ordinances. It was about the idea that you don't have to roll over when a bully comes with paper and a clipboard. One man with proof, with patience, with cold anger and the right allies, can topple a kingdom of lies. They thought they bulldozed my life. What they really bulldozed was their own empire. And I kept the receipts. The first quiet morning in my new cabin didn't come with applause, or headlines, or lawyers shaking my hand. It came with the sound of the lake breathing the way it always had before any of this started. The water glass, the call of a loon carrying across the mist, the smell of pine, clean and sharp in the early light. I sat on the porch with a mug of coffee, looking out at the dock the veterans built, watching the water take back its calm. For the first time in a long time, the silence didn't crush me. It carried me. I thought of Sarah then. Her quilt was gone, shredded in the demolition, but her voice lived in every beam I raised. A little to the left, Tom, I could almost hear her teasing me as I adjusted the frame on a window. She would have laughed at the irony that the same people who tried to erase her memory ended up forcing me to build something stronger, something that would stand longer than any of their petty rules. Word of what happened spread far beyond our county. Reporters called it the home destruction scam. Editorials asked how many other associations across the country were pulling the same tricks, using fake inspections, forged minutes, trumped-up violations to drive people from their homes. People started coming forward with their own stories, carrying their own receipts. And that's when I realized something. This wasn't just about my cabin. It never was. It was about everyone who's ever been told to sit down and shut up, while a bully in a blazer waved fake paperwork in there. If that's what Property Watch became our hammer past. Down to anyone else caught in the gears of fraud. Every download, every checklist, every family that stood a little taller when they told an HOA, "Show me your receipts." That was the real victory. Because here's the truth. I learned standing in the mud of my demolished home. Rage burns hot and fast, but proof outlasts fire. Paperwork beats lies. Every time doubt, the community knew it too. At the next county meeting, a neighbor stood up, his voice unsteady but firm. "You can't vote against gravity," he said, repeating the line I'd used in court. The room murmured in agreement. It wasn't just about land sloping to the water. It was about truth being what it is, whether people liked it or not. Gravity doesn't lie, and neither do the facts. One by one, the people who had been afraid of Lana's clipboard came out of hiding. The widow from 2018 walked into our new office with her head high. The family forced out over a fence color started the paperwork to reclaim damages. Even the quiet ones, the ones who never thought they had a voice, found themselves speaking up. And Lana, she sat in a cell, waiting for a trial that would drag every skeleton into daylight. The same woman who once smirked at me as if I were nothing but a hillbilly had become a cautionary tale, a lesson whispered in every HOA boardroom. Don't get cute with your power. Receipts will find you. A year later, Mac and I sat rocking on the porch at sunset. The house around us smelled of new wood and possibility. He looked at me and gave one of his rare smiles. "You didn't just build a house, Tom. You built a line no one's crossing again." He was right. They bulldozed my cabin. They bulldozed the last piece of my grief. And in trying to bury me under their lies, they planted something else entirely. They planted purpose. So if you're watching this and you've ever felt small against a clipboard, or powerless against a board with fake authority, remember this. You don't need rage. You need proof. You need allies. You need the courage to stand still while the storm blows itself apart around you, because one man with receipts can dismantle an empire of lies. And when justice finally shows up, it doesn't whisper. It arrives like an avalanche.